we not allowed to talk?
You're totally allowed to talk, Spence.
Just getting weird. I mean, like for the
As
first.
long as you can see your face, you can talk.
Okay, there you go.
Spencer's off the call. Rosie, kick him off.
Yeah, I'm on it. We're actually gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks for that intro, Spencer. Thanks everyone for being here, and for a ton of you for having your cameras on. Much appreciated. Makes me feel like I'm actually talking to human beings. Okay, so the one thing I wanted to tell you up front before we get started is I just announced that our next meeting in May is actually going to be in person. So it's going to be at the Heron Morton Park, just down the street from our 16th Street office. I hope you guys can make it. Please bring your own camp chair to sit in. I will have a few extra, but Billy, if you're on this call, I'm looking at you. Bring your own chair.
Who?
Okay, and then the other thing that I wanted to note, hi, baby Logan. The other thing that I wanted to note is that we have the grand opening for the Bottle Works office happening in about 2 weeks. The 30th? G, is that right? Yeah, the 30th.
Yes, Friday the 30th, 2 to 5.
Yeah, it'll be from 2 to 5 p.m. I am in our new Bottle Works office right now. It's super cool. Hope you guys can come. There will be alcohol, there will be food, there will be good times. So please come and join us. With that, I'm going to introduce our neighborhood speaker for the month, Miss Laura Borum. I hope you guys have been following along her Instagram journey the past couple of months as she and Brant have renovated their new house. So Laura, let me just share the graphic and then you can get started.
Awesome, thanks.
That's
Good morning,
my
everybody.
calendar. There we go. Go for it, Laura.
Way to go making this fancy graphic, by the way. Gigi, did you do this? Looks wonderful. Great. Wonderful. Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Laura. My family and I we bought our house in Mapleton Fall Creek about a year ago and gutted it down to the studs and renovated it during possibly the worst time ever to do such a project in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. But we survived to tell the tale. It's been fun to get to know the neighborhood more. Before this, we lived in Fall Creek, and then before that, we lived in Meridian Kessler Zone 2. So we're used to being able to walk to lots of things. And so we've had to kind of adjust to Mapleton Fall Creek. It's not like your typical, there's lots of restaurants and shops to go walk to. So we've had to try to navigate that kind of different experience here. But so far, we've loved it. For those that aren't familiar with it, kind of shows here where the neighborhood is. Within Mapleton Fall Creek lives Watson McCord Park, which is, you can kind of see that on the top left there. It runs from College to 38th over to Fall Creek through this kind of diagonal street that you see there back over to College. And it actually has a bird reserve in it, which is pretty cool right there. And then you have Historic Meridian Park, which also lives within Mapleton Fall Creek, which is Meridian to 34th to Central to 30th. But the greater neighborhood is Mapleton Fall Creek. Some of the things we have loved learning about and doing here is, I don't know if anyone's been to Pa and Ma's Backyard Barbecue, but they are just like the epitome of a neighborhood barbecue place. There's like kids running in and out with like $4 in their hands to try to get some kind of food. They do massive barbecues. They cater. They change their menu like every day. They're grilling something different. So that's been fun to get to know them a little bit. And their food is really, really yummy. So you should check them out. Some of the other things we love to do is we love to actually walk over to the Watson McCord area. They just did all this new asphalt paving, which my kids think is the best thing in the world. So they call that their skate park. So we go over there a fair amount just to walk and let them run. Our kids also go to school in the neighborhood. So we're pretty close, which is fun. So my kids actually walk back and forth to school every day. And then my kid recently realized at Pierre's barber shop that if you go in and you bring him fresh eggs, he'll let you pick out a candy or a soda. So we have chickens. So he'll bike over there with his friends and bring him in fresh eggs, and he'll let him pick out like an orange soda or a candy to take out, which is really fun for them. And then I don't know if you guys are familiar with Freewheelin' Bikes. It's an awesome city bike program. Yeah, if you're 10 or older, you can sign up and you take a class, and they basically teach you how to repair your own bike, and then you get to keep it. And then they also let you progress in being like in your skills as a bike repair person. And so like I have a kid that's very mechanically minded. And so his goal is to continuously to bump up and learn more to start to work there as a young apprentice. And so they're just a really incredible place that I just think is doing a whole lot of good in the neighborhood and providing bikes for people who need them. And then last but not least, our favorite probably is Tab. So it is a church, but they've also have a huge neighborhood sports program, and they've been running that for like decades. I think sometimes churches get a bad rap as being bad neighbors, but Tab is the complete opposite of that. They are here for the city. They are here for the neighborhood. And they have the best turf field. So they leave it open for the neighborhood to use when activities aren't going on there either. So my kids are regularly running over there, playing on that field all the time. And they're just really welcoming to people. So those are some of my favorite things about my neighborhood.
That was so perfect. Thanks, Laura. Okay, Crystal White, where you at? Hit us with some recognition.
There I am. Darn it. All right, pretty people. You guys, you're pretty too. It is a compliment when Crystal calls you pretty if you're a guy. Don't take it the wrong way. But I'm so excited to see so many of your faces. I'm going to act like it's because you want to go to lunch with me and not because you guys want to hear from Mark and Rex. So that's kind of how my self-esteem works. I have my own picture, my own mindset. But I want to do some quick recognition. And so if you are on the call, whether it's with your video on, off, if you're live, we want to give some finger snaps. Thank you, Rosie. You know I like to see everybody. Put me on gallery. And then if you have your video on and are going into the drawing to see if I'm taking you to lunch, finger snaps up. Don't act like you don't like free food. I need some finger snaps going, okay? Thank you, Laura. Okay. And then next, I want to recognize if you have pinned a buyer the last month, since the last time we did this, please like wave your hands in the air like that. We want to see who you are, and we're going to try not to be jealous. Wave your hands in the air. Let me see. Yes. Okay. If you have had a closing with a buyer, especially over the last month, I want to see your hands in the air. Let me see. You guys, it is happening. Okay. Spencer's got both his hands in the air. And then I want to give a big shout out, obviously, to our king and our reigning king and queen, our king of listings, our listing leader for the month, who is Rob Measle. Again, repeat. Let's give him a hand clap, finger snap. Now, here's the thing. Whatever Mark did to make it last month, it ain't going to work this coming up month. So all hands on deck if you want that spot, because it's all about what you got new from April 1 to April 30th. So I'm looking to see, is he going to keep his spot or is somebody else going to bump him off? And then we want to give another big round of applause for our reigning queen. And that is Kate Tuttle, our sales leader of the month last month. So yes. So before I pass this on to Mark and Rex, I really wanted to have something like inspirational and something that would just be ground shattering for you on my little piece. And I finally agreed at the last minute to get on a Zoom call for interrupting racism, which was an amazing Zoom call. And it just threw me off. But you know what it did? It reminded me, this market sometimes makes me feel a certain way. And you know what that way is, right? I don't have to tell you. But being on that Zoom call just kind of reminded me really quick that there are some other things going on in the world, right? And in our lives, in our state, our city, whatever, that can be a lot worse than some of the things that we may be encountering. And I want to be real transparent with you in saying, although that made me not feel so bad about the market, whatever you're feeling about the market, good or bad, it's your feeling, and it's okay to have that. Own it. But I want to challenge you guys to, if it's not a good feeling, I want to challenge you to decide how long you're going to sit in that feeling. Because I'll tell you, I'm a party girl, I'm a party animal, but a pity party is the most expensive party you can ever throw yourself. It is a party that will cost you your opportunities. It can cost you friends. It can cost you moments, everything that you'll never get back. And while I do think it's very real, it's raw, it's important to own what's really going on, but I do want you to choose how you respond to it and be careful of that to make sure that you're not robbing yourself of something great. And so I want to pass it on over to Mark and Rex, because I want to hear just as bad as you guys want to hear Mark, but I want to hear from our fearless leaders just like you guys do. So keep shining, but I do have something coming down the pipeline probably tomorrow for you guys that I really want to help address your mindset of where you're probably at right now. Take it away, Mark and Rex.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm very much looking forward to our very soon being in person at the park down the street from the office. I feel like good weather and being in person can do a lot to mindset and mentality, which is really important right now. I'm going to kick us off just by sharing a couple data points, and y'all rightly so give Rex and I grief about how numbers oriented we are. I'm pretty numbers oriented, and Rex is even more so than me. And I don't want to spend too much of the time, but I think these are just good contexts to a couple thoughts about what's going on in the market. They're fairly obvious, but I think citing the numbers, it's just helpful reminders for a bigger perspective on like what's happening outside of my daily experience. So I'm going to start with a couple numbers and then hand it over to Rex. I think he's going to share some numbers too. But I think the first is the really obvious one, and this is what everybody in our industry is talking about very clearly. We don't have enough real estate for sale. It's a national issue, but it's particularly present here in Indianapolis. So I don't know if any of you read the MIBOR market report for March. Just got ran the IBJ like it does every month, and y'all know, you have heard me make fun or joke about the IBJ's kind of the use of the really strong words in the headline of the market report. Like they always want to use a word like plummet, and they use the word plummet in reference to inventory in the headline of their article for March. And for once, I actually agree with the use of the word. Sometimes they use the word plummet and it's like a 6% drop in something. But March of 20 versus March of 21, we saw a drop of 61% in inventory. And so just boiling that down, if you do a lot of business in a particular part of our marketplace, and let's say there was 100 houses for sale in that particular part of the marketplace a year ago, which was not a really heavy inventory, it was fairly normal inventory. In that same area that had 100 for sale a year ago, there's 40 for sale right now. And when you look at it like that, and you think about what's the conditions that we're going to see if inventory is going down by that much, well, it's exactly what you think, right? Everybody's experiencing, it's very, very difficult working with buyers, particularly median price point, low down payment buyers. Prices are going up. March saw an 8% increase year over year in price, which interestingly enough was actually one of the lower year over year price increases we've seen in the last 6 months. We've really been floating more like at an average of 15% year over year price increase. My anticipation is that's probably what we'll see in April and May, is that prices in April and May will be more than a 15% price increase from last year. And again, those things can get hard to quantify, but really when you think about it, in that same area of the city that used to have 100 houses for sale that now has 40, a house that would have gone for $300,000 very well might now be going for $350,000 in a very short period of time. And so that obviously impacts us. It impacts our clients. I want to share my screen here. Shout out to Steve Lunsford. Steve is on the call. Steve speaks my language. Steve also loves numbers. I want to share something that Steve sent me this week. Okay, hang on a second. Steve was really interested to see if there had been a shift in the profile of buyers in terms of how many were individuals and how many were LLCs. And this is fascinating. My apologies for those that hate numbers and charts. I promise I'm going to get off of them soon. Go back 3 years ago, 94% of purchases in the first quarter 3 years ago were non-legal entity buys, which basically just means that's an individual. Fast forward 3 years to first quarter of this year, that went from 94 to 78. So what you see there is a significant uptick in the number of purchases being carried out by some sort of company. Now, these aren't necessarily big hedge funds out of California, although they are buying in Indianapolis. These could be LLCs that you have. Many of you have an LLC and you buy properties in that. That you compound. You see what's happening is that when inventory is going down and investment purchases are going up, you see how it just continues to get harder and harder for the first-time homeowner to compete with that. I'm going to stop my share. Steve, thanks for shooting that over. I think that's a pretty fascinating dynamic that I actually don't know that many people in our industry are talking about, is that it's not just the residential owner-occupied buyer that is jumping into the marketplace, keeping inventory so low. Last thing I'm going to say that's a numbers-oriented thing, and then I'm going to hand this over to Rex. We are seeing a different conversation around commission. I took a look this morning. I was curious to see what the average buyer agent commission currently advertised on active listings was in MyBor. And I was a little surprised by this, guys. I thought it was going to be lower than it was. I feel the pressure in the industry. Builders are clearly not paying, nationally speaking, builders are not paying the same sort of compensation to agents representing buyers right now. A lot of national home builders are going to like a 1% or even a flat $1,000. We haven't seen that quite so much here in Indianapolis, but that's the trend. We're seeing buyers agents chipping commission into deals to try to make their buyer's offer more attractive. So there's clearly pressure on revenue. But I was interested to see the average right now of active listings in MyBor for the BAC is 2.88%, which is essentially where our average has been for a long time. I'm not saying that it's not changing. I think time's going to have to tell if the typical commission structure is really genuinely changing, or if it's just increased pressure and conversation that isn't going to be able to change that. But I do think it was interesting that, and this is, over 1,000 listings. So it's not really like an anecdotal number. It's a lot of data there. And we haven't been at 3% on average BAC for a long, long time. So being at 2.88 right now, I thought that was just an interesting point that probably doesn't line up with what most of us would have guessed. I think we're feeling a lot of pressure on revenue, particularly as buyers agents. So I was actually kind of encouraged to find that 2.88. Okay, I'm going to hit pause. I want to come back to two particular thoughts that I have just in terms of like, okay, if that's the data, what should we be thinking about as realtors and what should we be doing in light of that? But now that I got my numbers in and put a third of you to sleep, I'm going to let Rex really take it home on the numbers. Fire away.
Put the other 2/3 to sleep. All right, here we go. Well, I wanted to give some national stats to what we're experiencing because what we're seeing here is playing out coast to coast. And so I've been looking into, some information. This kind of helped contextualize where we're at for me. If we look at the ratio of home prices and to hourly earnings, and actually this data is as far as growth percentages is reflected almost exactly in home price, or sorry, in the rent scenario as well. But from 1998 to 06, we saw about a 58% growth in that ratio in the direction we don't want, meaning housing is costing more compared to what we're earning. And from 2012 to 2020, we've seen about 30%. Now, once we adjust that for the consumer price index, that means that from 2012 to 2020, we've seen about a 50% growth in the ratio of what it costs to rent or own a home compared to what we're making, based on average hourly rate compensated. As we break that down into why and into the home prices in real terms, homes are costing us the most they've costed since 2006, 2007. That is something that is driven, largely by available inventory. That doesn't surprise anybody. But the why around this is actually something that's really interesting. In 2007, we kind of hit our peak at 3.7 million homes in the US as far as housing inventory. Since then, we have, over the last decade, consistently lost ground. We're at about just over 1 million unavailable homes. We lost about 500,000 last year. And COVID certainly played into that. It slowed down new construction. We saw manufacturing delays. We saw developers put projects on pause. We certainly had labor shortages. But I think a bigger piece of this puzzle is largely being overlooked. And that has to do with the stage in life that millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers are entering into. The median, this is according to NAR, the median first-time home buyer age is about 33 years old. And the median age of repeat buyers is 52, which is almost dead center of where millennials are and Gen Xers. So what we're seeing is, millennial group entering into that 33-year-old mark, starting to buy homes for the first time at a faster rate than we've had in the past, let's say 14, 15 years easily, is certainly ramping up. We are also seeing the Gen X population hit a place of kind of peak wealth generation, which is playing into this as well as far as investment diversification and honestly just buying homes. What we are also seeing is the baby boomers starting to move into different housing options, but also having some greater wealth ability to be able to stay in their homes longer and not necessarily transition quite as much as we may have had in the past. We also don't have as many people, multi-generational families living with each other as we've historically had. We have a lot more people owning their own homes. But the number of 33-year-olds has risen from 3.2 million in 2006 to over 4 million today. And that's a huge, huge shift that's driving a lot of the inventory shortage that we're seeing. And, Mark and I have talked quite a bit about mortgage rates and, could kind of the bond yield or whatnot, or the, treasury rate go up. And I've been pushing on quite a bit that, that interest rate has to go up. Mark, there's one thing I wasn't factoring in here, and you already knew it. But the policies that bail out our government on some of the work that on the debt service as that spirals up also serves to cap those mortgage rates. So I think you got it on. I think mortgage rates are going to stay relatively low, which is a total 180 from where I was, I think, even 48 hours ago, as I've looked into this more. But suffice to say, on a national level, we're seeing a group in that millennial range of 66 million people entering into that first time home buying range in mass. That's having a tremendous impact. We're seeing Gen X start to hit that median repeat buyer phase, and I think that is just having a huge impact on the available inventory that we have, and that's been pretty well replicated throughout history. So if we take a look at how housing inventory is kind of swelled and dipped, and if you want to track how housing inventory is going to be affected, look at the post-millennial generation that now is maybe in that like 5 to 23-year-old, and where they're going to be, and that's about 61 million people in the U.S. That'll have an effect as they start moving through that as well. How we deal with that, how we get ahead of it, we react to that differently based on a number of other, realities with the market. But the good news there is that there is an ebb and flow that we can follow. And this reality does not last forever.
Rex is referencing, he asked me the other day what I think is going to happen with interest rates. Will they go up? And I told him that I've retired from answering that question, that I refuse to provide any sort of opinion or guess because there's no rhyme or reason to what will happen to them in the future, is my current belief. Thanks, Rex. Guys, I want to transition to a couple specific thoughts, and I do want to leave room for questions. Because there's just so much to talk about what's going on right now. And honestly, I've loved Crystal's communication on our Platt Facebook page. There's a lot to be frustrated about right now as a realtor, particularly because I've talked to several of you about this. I believe the most fun and valuable thing that we get to do as realtors is help someone buy their first house. Like, we get to do a lot of different things, but I don't think anything that we do is more meaningful or valuable or fun than working with a first-time homebuyer. Right now, most first-time homebuyers are having a miserable experience. And so it's just not fun. And it's a very different set of challenges than we have seen. People are referencing 2008, 2009, are we headed there? Everything about the market is like, no, we're actually moving in the exact opposite direction of what was happening in 08 and 9. But I just think because of that frustration, as realtors, we have to work harder than we normally do to keep the right mentality. It's always a challenge of our job because our job always can be frustrating. But I think right now, if you take the most fun and valuable thing we do and make it frustrating, you really have to work harder on your outlook and just kind of being able to process that stuff. So I want to give you a couple of encouragements and one piece of advice in particular that my team was talking about the other day. So the largest thing I would say is that marketplaces always present opportunity. If you don't hear anything else, marketplaces always present opportunity. And the professional who will, in the long run, take advantage of those opportunities is the one who can maintain the right attitude. I think everything else, all the data, kind of funnels into what's happening and where is the opportunity. Hard question to answer. But I think at a philosophical level, I would say markets always have opportunity, and that opportunity is never static. It's a moving target, right? Like, what is the opportunity going to be in the future is not what it is today. And the people who are really quickly able to accept the change, right? The people are able to say, I can't control what I can't control, right? No one on this call can affect interest rates. No one on this call can affect inventory or prices or what it's like to be a first-time home buyer. You cannot control those things. So really quickly pivoting to what can I control? Well, I can control my own trajectory in the industry. What is it that I'm focused on? What am I going to be investing in terms of my business development? And I actually, guys, I don't believe the specifics of what you do matters as much as, am I going to take the attitude that there's always opportunity? Because if you take that attitude, you'll figure the specifics out. Easier said than done. I get it. I particularly, if you're in your first 5 years in the business right now, odds are that you're buyer heavy. Most of your business is buyers if you're newer in the business. That's the way it's always worked. Well, that's also the time where your income is more unpredictable, is your first 5 years. And so you're really facing some challenging circumstances right now. I think in a different context, maybe with me or Rex or Crystal, or if you're on a team with your team, I think there's a lot of good strategies to think about, okay, how do I go about developing my business in light of what's happening? But I'm going to kind of beat that horse dead, is to say, I think the most important is that opportunity always exists. I'm going to give you a couple examples of this to maybe kind of prove the point. Transaction count in our industry in 2009 and 2010. What do you think transaction count did in 2009 and 2010 from what it had been in the years prior? Anyone want to take a stab in the chat or unmute yourself?
Say it was the same.
Transaction count actually went way down in 09. Stuff got pretty hard to move. A lot of people were upside down. There was a lot of fear. Renters weren't entering the marketplace necessarily. First-time homebuyer tax credit really helped. But transaction count went down. But two things happened. Number one, licensee count tracks. We've talked about this before. Our industry is very fickle, and licensee count just basically follows on a time lag from transaction count. So the average number of realtors in the industry compared to the number of transactions taking place actually holds pretty consistent. So when transaction count goes up, a year later, it's pretty safe to assume that license count's going to go up. Well, the same thing happens if transaction count goes down. In addition to transaction count and realtor count tracking with each other, prices recovered fairly quickly, as did transaction count, really by 2012. Some markets even earlier than that. In Indianapolis, it was really even earlier than that. So what happens if transaction count went down, a bunch of people leave the industry, and then all of a sudden transaction count recovers and prices start going up? Who benefits? The realtors that stuck around. Right now, granted, easier said than done. I'm not insensitive to like, what would it take to stick around in that situation? Well, our transaction count as an industry right now is going down because we don't have enough inventory. It's a little bit different in that prices are going up, right? So transaction count going down, prices going up is the opposite price movement from then. But our industry is at an all-time high in terms of license count. I think it might be the safest bet in the world. I will not predict interest rates. I will predict license count. License count in our industry over the next 2 years will go down. And I think it might go down significantly. Number one, because we've had a record 2-year increase in license count. But if transaction count goes down, this is what happens. So I'm not rooting for that, not celebrating that. I'm only pointing out that markets tend to work in such a way that they always provide opportunity to the people that will look for it and work for it and be patient for it. The opportunity doesn't just disappear. Second point that I would make, I think this is, Stephen, I want to come back to your question because I don't think I understand it, but let me give this data point and then I want to circle back to that. Our own brokerage, our average commission side, again, if I were to look at this based on just kind of experience and anecdote, like how are things feeling right now? And what does a Platt agent's side of revenue look like right now in comparison to what it did prior? Our average deal year to date is at 2.7. So it's essentially right at the industry norm, which is the same that our revenue was in 2019 per deal. It's actually a bit higher than it was in 2020 per deal, but they're all very close. And I'm not saying that means we're not feeling pressure. I know several of you, particularly again, when working with builders, have had some deals where you feel like, man, I think I got underpaid there and I don't know what to do about it. Strategy is one thing, but I think zooming out for a second and say, hey, at least for right now, our average side per deal has held consistent. And while transaction count is going down, prices are going up. So you wash all that out and say there hasn't really been a change in the projected revenue per realtor. Now, does that mean it's fun working with buyers and first-time home buyers? No. It's still like fairly miserable. But I think in terms of like, what's the business opportunity that exists for a realtor? The data says, hey, there's a lot of reason to stay very positive about that. And where I think our frustrations are the best aimed is, okay, how can I let that frustration drive me to be creative and work hard to find a solution for a buyer? Steve, I think about the conversation Steve and I had maybe on Thursday or Friday last week about your underappraised FHA buyer and how you're like, Steve's really outside the box on this one, trying to find a solution. That's still frustrating. Attitude matters. But I think if you let a deal like that influence your own kind of internal projection about the business opportunity you have as a realtor, you might end up letting it affect you more negatively than it should. And I'm not saying, Steve, you weren't doing that, Steve. I'm just using you as an example because I think the industry actually is still saying hey, there's lots of opportunity, as there always has been. By the way, Spencer, if you ran a drinking game for this meeting and opportunity was on the card, you all are drunk by now. So Spencer, you missed an opportunity to do that one. Okay. Stephen, you asked, does that take into account team models for transaction count? Can you clarify that for me? Maybe unmute yourself or go for it.
I just feel like teams weren't really a thing in 2012 and they're much bigger now. So is the number of transactions per agent, is that split out by agent, or if somebody has 15 people under them, is that all included in them?
It would net out the same because industry-wide, this is just based on how many people have an active real estate license and how many transactions were taking place. Whether those transactions are happening in an individual setting or a team setting, because for sure, it's way more likely that they're happening in teams. So the distribution of those transactions might look different. And then a lot of them are now like running under one ID maybe, or something, something like that. But the number of closings per licensed realtor has historically held consistent with about a year time lag.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying.
Minna asked, do you think record entry into the industry followed by record rapid exit would create any need for reform as to how easy entry is into the industry? Oh my gosh, we have our industry has a big problem. Y'all, somebody could probably easily get me on this soapbox. Our local, state, and national trade organizations, as organizations, are incentivized by license count. They're not incentivized by transaction count. Their revenue model requires a lot of people to hold a real estate license. And so while members of the industry might want license count to go down and the barrier to entry to go up, which it should, it's going to be very difficult to do that if our trade organizations are built on a revenue model off of license count. Do I think there's a likelihood that that changes? No, big trade organizations aren't likely to change their revenue model because it's risky. In an ideal world, we could go back and build the revenue model off of transaction count because I think we'd be better aligned with the trade organization then. So I think the filter is going to be success, not getting your license. Do you know what I mean by that, Minna? People that come in don't see the type of outcome that they were hoping to and exit. That has always been the hedge against license count. I'm just reading Joel's question. Joel's asked, a standard response to potential sellers who ask if we will discount our fee traditionally has been no, due to not underselling our services. How should our mindset adjust here, if at all, based on current market dynamic? It's a great question. I do think primarily sellers, but just consumers in general, are putting more pressure on commission revenue. I'd actually suggest that maybe we have an agent meeting, a monthly agent meeting that is just about commission trajectory in the industry and how we respond. But Joel, I would say if there is a compelling reason for you to discount, then you should consider it. But a seller asking for it isn't a compelling reason. There has to be something behind that. And so in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. But I would just say, don't forget that there are still a lot of transactions, particularly as long as they're not like really higher price point transactions, a lot of median or just above median transactions that are happening right now at 6% with 3% going to both sides. The data backs it up. So not opposed to reductions. Y'all know that. You have the flexibility to do so. But I would say the market isn't quite yet at the point where it's forcing you to do that. I think you have to have a compelling reason to do it, and you very well might. Yeah, Jamie, it is interesting. I think as days on market shift down, the value that a realtor provides, I believe, is still there, but it's almost like it's changed categories. Right? Like marketing a house has never been easier, but helping a seller navigate through negotiations to the best possible closing, I think you could argue it's never been harder than it is right now. Not harder to sell, but harder to navigate to the best outcome. I want to do one more thing here that we were talking about in my team. Keep asking questions, by the way. I love the engagement. I was talking with my team a couple days ago, and the topic of buyers. I know many of you have had this happen recently. A couple of my teammates have. Buyers that are just kind of putting themselves on the sidelines. Many of them having to sign a lease, right? Like I bet the majority of you were working with a buyer a while ago who thought they had plenty of time to find a house because their lease runs up in June. And now they're saying to you, at what point do I sign an extension to just stay in my rental that I like for another year because I don't want my landlord to rent it to somebody else? And now I have to move even though I can't find a house to buy. So renters are having to extend leases. There's no question. And I think a lot of first-time buyers in particular are asking their agents, should I sit on the sidelines? And I think there's two very different reasons that someone would sit on the sidelines, intentionally sit on the sidelines. So I think your conversation with them should always be about asking questions, finding out what their priorities are, like helping them navigate to their own decision as opposed to a simple yes or no. But if a buyer is sitting on the sideline because they think prices are too high, the data in the market right now says they're going to look back a decade from now and wish that they had bought in 2021 instead of 2022 or 2023. The trajectory of the market says prices are just going to keep going up. They might not go up at the same rate they have this last year, but everything about this says prices are going to keep going up, particularly in Indianapolis. You can't guarantee that to someone, but share some of this data with them. What are prices doing right now? What does inventory look like? And say, hey, if you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for prices to drop, it's more likely than not that they're going to be sitting for a while. And so clearly we can't pressure them. We should not pressure them. But sharing good data, I think, can help someone to understand, I feel like I'm overpaying right now because of what prices were 2 years ago. But if I think about where it's headed 2 years from now, I might be motivated to enter the market now instead of later. The second reason somebody might be sitting on the sidelines, though, is if they could increase their available down payment. To me, that is a much more rational reason to sit on the sidelines. If you're an FHA buyer right now, but you're in a income to expense situation where you could say, okay, I'm FHA right now, but if I waited until January of 22, I could be a 10% insured conventional, or maybe I could even get to 20%. Or if my family had a heads up, I could borrow some money from them for down payment. I just need to wait. That, I think, probably does project to improve their outcomes. So I think it's just a good example of getting at what would cause a buyer frustration and how will they respond to it. And then as a realtor, how can you help them think through that? If somebody could increase their down payment right now, by almost any means, it's going to help them as a consumer. I think you all know that. But if they're waiting for prices to drop, it doesn't look good.
Hey, Mark, just something to add on to that. In conversations that we've had with some of our clients, if you look at some of the other major US cities, especially on the coast, along with DC and Chicago, this is a reality that they've faced for quite some time now. And we started to see the turn where, maybe 18 months ago, maybe 24 in some cities, that it became cheaper to rent than to buy. And those cities started to cool off, but they accelerated into this in, let's say, 2011. Maybe you could stretch 2012, 2013, depending on where we are. And that they're a pretty good lead indicator of, if you follow that trend line, how long you're going to have to wait before you start to see any sort of tail off for Indy. So unless they're looking to wait, 5+ years, if we go by history, nobody's saying, boy, I'm glad I waited 24 months to buy, unless, again, as you said, they're saving up on that down payment to put themselves in a better position.
Yeah. And guys, even in Indianapolis, from the peak of the market, say in 2006 to the low point in the market, which was probably like late 08, early 09. So there's about 2.5 years there from the peak to the low. Prices in Indianapolis basically didn't change. So you think about, in our market, the worst collapse the real estate industry has ever seen. Prices basically didn't change for 2.5 years. And so I think to predict a notable sustained drop in prices, none of us can say that will never happen. But what we can say is, well, it hasn't to date. And inventory keeps going down. So yes, there was a lot of foreclosures in our market in 09 and 10. But the vast majority of those were connected to either bad mortgages or refis, not purchasers who ended up upside down because prices dropped. Prices didn't really drop. So just that's a perspective there that you can't take that like a weapon to your buyer and say, I'm going to prove that you're thinking irrationally here with data. Like, we all know how well that's going to go over, and they're probably going to fire you. But I think taking it gently to them as a part of being their representative and helping them to make good decisions about where prices are headed. And maybe the encouragement is, hey, can I help you think through strategies to increase your available down payment while you sit on the sidelines, and then let whatever happens with prices happen. If they can increase down payment, they're going to be able to enter the market more effectively. I'm looking through here to see if we have any questions. Yeah, Tricia, I think it's a really good question. At one of the NCAA games, I got into a really great conversation with some friends of mine here in Indy who are at a different brokerage, who had been talking with a lender about this. I think the difference is going to be I think when the foreclosure forbearance is released and banks are able to start that process, I don't think we're going to see a lot of bank-owned properties because none of those homeowners are upside down. I think it will help inventory because there's enough people who are behind on their mortgages that if they have to catch up, then they're likely going to have to sell their house and downsize or rent for a while, which could bring some houses to the inventory. Obviously, nobody's rooting for somebody in their house to have to sell it because they're behind on their mortgage. But just as an industry, I think that is going to increase inventory a little bit when it happens.
So, sorry, random question related to that. Then that'll be kind of an upcoming thing for us to start learning about, is kind of like short sales and other bank forced sales, there's probably going to be a market for knowledge in that area as well, helping counsel people on how to deal with that and how not to be left with paying out at the closing table.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see. I think you're absolutely right. There will be bank involvement, but it won't be short sale or foreclosure like it was in 2009 and 10. It'll be a different type of outcome. It'll be a seller selling to a buyer with the bank being the instigator of the transaction, not necessarily a party to the transaction. Amy has asked about the appraisal gap issue. Well, Amy, we're coming up on 1 o'clock, so I don't think we're going to be able to hit that one today. But I would say utilize your network here. Probably everyone in the company within the last 6 months, on one side or the other, has come up to an appraisal gap problem. And Amy, without a doubt, this is the most common question I have had from plat agents over the last 6 months. Is an appraisal problem. They're all different. I would say utilize for sure Crystal, Rex, and me on that, but also your peers. I mean, I think odds are that someone has had a similar situation. So like, okay, is it FHA? Is it conventional? Are you on the buy side or are you on sell side? What price point are we talking about? How big is the gap? I think they're all different strategies, but for sure, let us know. Oh, and I see you're actually, yeah, you're talking about essentially cash in the marketplace, eliminating the appraisal problem. All the more reason about buyers, if they're sitting on the sidelines, to increase their available cash. Totally logical thing to do right now. Because if you're relying on the appraisal to hit your number, it's a very difficult market for that. Amy, they never catch up. They catch up when prices stop going up.
That's perfect. Mark, did you want to answer one more question?
No, I will just say, if you're feeling pretty frustrated, particularly with those median price point buyers, call somebody at Platt and just, I mean, honestly, it's like therapy. Talking with someone else that is experiencing the same thing will make you a better representative, because you'll be able to process some of that frustration with a peer and then be able to be like, I think, just a better presence and representative for your client who is trying to do that with you. So if you have shown them 40 houses and they've lost out on 6 offers, it's really hard not to add your own frustration to the process. That is totally natural human instinct. And I think maybe talking that through with a teammate or staff at Platt or me or Crystal or Rex, find somebody to just talk through that, because I think it'll make you a better rep for them.
Yeah, so good. Rex, Mark, thank you. Crystal, I believe you have some lunch winners to announce.
I do. So I had one and then I accidentally had to recount, and so I got 2. So Amy Jones and Joel Matthews, I get to know you better. So I'll reach out to you two. We will be doing lunch one at a time, because I want all my time with Amy, all my time with Joel. I want to get to know you better. And that is all I have. Thank you guys again for showing your wonderful faces. Like, this was the best meeting ever because of your face.
Okay, guys, speaking of lunch, I forgot to mention that our upcoming monthly agent meeting, so 1 month from today, lunch will be provided. So hopefully we'll be able to get back into some of our normal rhythm of having lunch and more of a discussion-based meeting for these monthly agent meetings. So see you in 1 month at the park, and hopefully a lot of times before then. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.